That's it. We've just hit the record button there now. So welcome along to everyone to the next a part of our research seminar series. And today we're talking about the future of Freire, and we're having, in a very Freirean style, a dialogue between our three participants. So we're just going to start. We'll go around the speakers and ask them just to introduce themselves very quickly, and then we'll move on to the more substantial inputs after that. So Ntombi, would you like to introduce yourself then, maybe Peter?
Sure. Just for people to bear with my voice, it's grumpy because I have a mild COVID infection, but I'm okay. My name is Ntombi. I am a development practitioner. I have worked with these methods for over 30 years.
Okay.
I have also taken time off to study what they mean with image. And my research revealed so much about awareness, which I will talk a lot about. Yeah.
Great, Ntombi.
I'm not taking more time about myself. It's done for now. We will ask each other more questions, but I'm honored to be part of this conversation because COVID has taught us so much about how to adapt these methods to any reality. But I will share that when I share my insights. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this panel.
And it's lovely that you're here. Yes. Peter?
Hi, everyone. I'm Peter Dorman. It's lovely to meet Ntombi. I haven't met her before. And it's great to be part of this conversation. Thanks, Paddy, for inviting me. I'm a community worker, community education facilitator based in Ireland, live up here in sunny County Louth today. And yeah, so that's who I am.
Thanks, Peter. And Paddy?
Yeah, my name is Paddy Reilly, and I'm a lecturer in the International Development Departments in Maynooth. And I suppose I like to think of myself as a facilitative educator is a title I prefer, but that's too long for my door. So, but I'm just someone who's passionate about participatory approaches to learning. And I suppose I'm someone who I have a great regard for, but not an uncritical one, for Paulo Freire and his approaches. And I'll be talking more about those shortly.
Great. Okay. So, and my name is Mags Liddy. I am senior tutor with the Department of International Development, and I work a lot in global citizenship, education, and sociology of development. So we'll move along as the seminar is described. It's a conversation, and as it's about Paulo Freire, it's designed in a very dialogic way, and each of the speakers are going to give a short input on their own perspectives and how Freire has informed their work, and also how they've moved beyond Freirean ideas and adapted to the circumstances and situations that they are working in. So each speaker will have a few minutes, 10 minutes or so for their inputs, and then there will be a conversation which will evolve hopefully organically between the three. And there's, of course, will be opportunities for questions and answers from all of you in the audience. In a very non-Freirean kind of manner, there is also the chat box on the side of the screen. If anyone would like to type any immediate comments or questions, or maybe if you have to leave early and you want to feed into the process, I'll be keeping an eye on that chat box. And otherwise, I will just be keeping an eye on the time. But mainly, I will be listening and learning from Paddy, Ntombi, and Peter. So I'll hand it over it'll be Paddy first. And yeah, so Paddy, Ntombi, and then Peter. Okay, so over to you, Paddy.
Okay, thank you very much, Mags, for that. I suppose I before I talk about Freire's influence on me, which I'm sure I'll find room to add in as the seminar progresses, I thought I'd use a few minutes of my time, my precious time, to share some thoughts drawn from a conference that we ran in October last year, which commemorated the birth of Freire. Some of you may have been at it at the time. Looking back and looking forward, Freire's influence on global development practice and education. And I suppose also because at this stage, Mags and I, as co-editors, I think we're called, is that right, Mags? We're just about finishing the final stages of the papers from that event, and we're due to publish them. So that's my first plug. And maybe not the only plug I'm going to make about it, out shortly anyway, as a collection of papers from the keynote speakers and from the workshops that we ran that day. And I suppose reading through them in the last week or so, as we were going through our proofing of them, many of them revived memories for me of, I suppose, the great conversations we did have on that day. And I'll mention just a couple. I haven't got time for all of them. You'll be glad to hear. My colleague Eilish Dillon gave her focus on the influence of Freire in higher education. And she talked about the importance of global citizenship education as a vehicle, she maintains. And I'll just quote from her paper. She says, when the connections are broken between people and each other, people and the planet, the present and the future, actions and consequences, we need education, which helps us to bridge these connections. And then Eilish singles out the role of critical pedagogy in any such education, which is another tangible link to Freire. And one of our concluding points is the importance of radical hope, and citing Freire as saying one of the tasks of the progressive educator is to unveil opportunities for hope, no matter what the obstacles may be. And I liked this, not only because it was one of my own conclusions. I have a paper as an afterword of the conference papers. And it inspired me first when I read Pedagogy of Hope, which was Freire's revisiting of the original pedagogy of the oppressed. And those words were the ones I actually also had on my paper. You'll think that we were actually cogging off one another. But Eilish cited, those words Eilish cited, and continued with the words, and after all, without hope, there's little we can do. And it reminded me when in classroom reflections and exercises, we would often discuss responses to oppression. And we often concluded that to be powerless is awful, but to be without hope is even worse. So that's what struck me about that paper. Then we had David Archer from ActionAid, and I liked his papers for many reasons as well, but including that despite his obvious admiration for Freire, he doesn't flinch from sharing how Freire's ideas were co-opted and abused by both left-wing and right-wing regimes that he observed on his journeys throughout Latin America. And a key aspect of his presentation also was the development of the Reflect program as an instance of the hybridization of Freirean principles, marrying them with PRA, participatory rural appraisal. And it's just something others in the conference on that day, including you, Peter, if I may say so, really articulated well about how Freire's principles were blended into a new way of actually working with people. And the third main speaker we had that morning was Zoriana Pishek from Ukraine. And she shared her experience as a learner when first encountering Freire And then secondly, her role as an empowered co-learner, co-teacher of others. And she talked about how she gained skills in facilitating the process of liberating learning. And I thought her reflection was the most personal of any of the papers I'd seen, and that added strength to it. It provided valuable insights into what it's like to experience oppression. In her narrative as someone initially seeking asylum in this country, followed by a different kind of oppression, which she experienced in direct provision. And then her evolution as an educator and facilitator of others, especially others at the fringes of society. So Freirean is clearly identified throughout as a key resource for her, as a source she journeyed with and continually reflected on at different stages of her life, seeing new points of relevance with Freirean along the way. And then the afternoon workshops were succinctly summarized by Mags in our publication, which is very useful. So I'm plagiarizing Mags now as I speak. And it included the insights that Freirean advocated for an authentic education and conscientization as the process of how we know the world and become humanized and aware. Education can become authentic where students' knowledge and experience is valued and where their learning is purposeful and relevant. Through dialogue and exchange, teacher-student relationships are transformed. And Mags links the conversations we had on community activism and international development practice, which Peter and Ntombi will share more about shortly, I'm sure. By clarifying the principles of community work as participation, empowerment, and collective decision-making. And these echo many of Paulo Freire's principles. So there's no singular path to development. It's a contested and debated concept, often discussed without the participation of those who are most affected. Participation is central to development work, whether it's community, national, or an international level. And we think that we managed to bridge those terrains during the conference. Communities themselves must identify problems and decide how to redress their concerns for themselves. And returning to formal education, Mags indicated that the papers show overall, Freirean reminds those working in education to question what the purpose of education is. And the question is posed by bell hooks. Are we teaching to transgress? Is higher education a process of depositing knowledge or opening minds up? And in this regard, I was struck by the comments of David Koalam from the Arupe University in Harare, where he said, it's not surprising that in many places, Freire's radical ethical approaches are sanitized, standardized, and deodorized. So there are so many more insights I could share. I have several pages here, but relax. I'm going to quit now because I'm conscious that this would comfortably use up the hour that we have. And it's the antithesis of what Freirean is supposed to be about. And it would be the banking model, I suppose, instead. So I just want to close my opening remarks with a quote from Freire's contemporaries, Gadotti and Torres, who after his death stated educators can be with Freirean or against Freirean, but not without Freirean. And I like this statement because it captures some of the questions I have with regard to the title of this seminar, you know, the future of Freirean education, should be a question mark. Can there still be a Freirean education if practitioners of development and of community work within higher education and so forth know nothing about him or his philosophy? This is in part evoked by another point from David Koalam, when in his paper he comments, during my stint as a development grant manager in Southern Africa, I met many organizations and practitioners using the Freirean methods and yet they had never heard of Freire or seen the Training for Transformation workbooks. So I look forward to pursuing this kind of idea and any other questions that arise in the next hour. Thank you.
Great, Paddy, and perfectly on time as well. Ntombi, I'll hand over to you now. You muted there, Ntombi. No, Ntombi, I'm afraid you're still on mute. So a moment and we'll all be.
Dorman, is it possible for us to unmute?
No.
I was muted.
There we go.
There we go.
Yeah, we can hear you perfectly now. That's great.
Yes. So my experience or exposure to Freire was when I worked with Anne Hope and Sally Timmel. I'm not going to talk about them because today is about how I have experienced this work in the 20 years that I have engaged. But before that, I was using these methodologies, not knowing that they were Freirean methodologies until they were given a name to me as a development worker. So I was wondering if I could share. I timed myself for 10 minutes. I might even use 5 minutes. Can I share the screen or not? Hello?
Yes. Just share screen there in Ntombi.
Okay, let me see if I know how to do that while I'm talking. I was facilitating a workshop in Western Papua when Paddy approached me to say, can you talk about the experience and the relevance of Freire in our times and beyond? Is it relevant? So I asked exactly that question to the people that I was engaging with at the end of the workshop. And I said, what is the relevance of these methods in our times? And their response to me was the most insightful. They drew spectacles, a lens. I will send you my thing because I don't know how I'm failing to share with you. They sent me a lens of spectacles like my glass. They drew it and they said, look, the way you see things is not the way things are. And you cannot see things on behalf of another person. We see things contextually, and we see things individually, and so forth. So that lens of glasses was, for me, the reading of the reality and the rewriting of the history and the engagement to change the lives for the better. So then when I went ahead, I had to shape my conversation in 3 areas: curiosity, creativity, and consciousness. These are part of the key ideals that we get from Freire. But what is it about curiosity? Curiosity is that urge to find out what exactly is happening. This illustration comes from Indonesia as well. Maria saw women selling products in the market, and she decided that she was going to teach them how to produce better so that they can sell more. But when she engaged in listening to the women and in dialogue, she discovered that the women's priority was literacy in Bahasa, so that they can negotiate favorable prices for their produce. And she thought the produce was low quality. It needed to be improved. The women wanted literacy. So there we go. Listening survey and dialogue cannot belong to the past. It is part of the present, was part of the past, and will be part of the future. So, and then, let me just see if I can do this. And then this whole thing around creativity. So for creativity, we also look at what Robert Chambers says. Oh, development does not tick boxes. You live, you miss everything. So it's about flexibility and adaptability, which for Freire is praxis, reflection, and action. How could these ideals belong to the past when life is always about how we read the present and how we want to see the future and how we learn from the past? So according to this group, which was the young people in Sudan and in Uganda. So I will pick the Ugandan example because this was during COVID, total lockdowns. And the market women, their survival base was in selling their vegetables, and they could not go door to door to sell the vegetables. They had to adapt to the technology, to use their cell phones, to chat on Facebook with their clients, and to agree where to put the vegetables and to collect the money. So they adapted to that, and they have since continued to work in this way, and they have diversified the market, and they're making more returns. There goes creativity as part of praxis, how we can reflect and how we can learn and make appropriate action. And then consciousness. This one is an interesting one. I think this is what Paddy has kind of underlined. Who am I? Who are we? What values hold us together? That kind of critical awareness, finding one's voice, the power of voice, and how people I have worked with use the power of voice to change their lives, is also telling us that conscientization is an ongoing process. It is adapted to the reality of the people. On this, I want to share with you a story from my co-sister from Tanzania. She wrote something that really stood out to me. Ntombi, I'm so grateful. I found my power. I found my voice. I found myself. I took a vow of obedience, but inside of me was a big no. After TFT processes, conscientization processes, I found my voice. I spoke out. The priests are angry. The women sing songs for me when I go to the villages. The sisters are afraid of me. They say I will be excommunicated. Am I powerful? If I found my voice, yes, I engage with women. We are doing projects, and I think Jesus is happy. So for me, pulling all these lessons together, I said to myself, what stands out that we need to engage with Freire is the openness to adapt to the situation and to engage in dialogue and help people to find their power of voice, because we don't have to do anything for anybody as development workers. They can do that for themselves. And the final thing that sits with me is that spark from the generative theme. If we find where the emotions are bottled and use the social and structural analysis to unbottle the emotions, people take actions for themselves. And that, for me, came from Nigeria when they were beating and killing each other in the towns in Abuja when they were during the total lockdown, COVID. One woman decided to open a food bank and everybody started bringing food. And she said, this is not enough. These women must learn to grow food for themselves. She went for land from the local authority, got the land. Women are producing food. They are selling and they are feeding themselves. This is how I have experienced the relevance of Freire, how the safe dialogical spaces transform people through finding their voices. Thank you. I have a PDF. I will send it to you, Max. I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Ntombi. Some powerful examples of development practice and how Freire has inspired and inspired thinking and praxis. Excellent. Thank you for that. Now, Peter, how are you? You all set? Yep.
How am I? I'm a little bit intimidated after that. I don't know how I can follow it. Ntombi, thank you. That was so inspiring. and it echoes so much as well with the bit of experience I have. I'm a community worker, community activist in working mostly in Dublin over the last few decades. I really, I was saying to Paddy yesterday, I don't have a very strong connection with Freire, but more with Training for Transformation. So I'm not I tried to read the book years ago, but a transformative experience for me was participating in the Training for Transformation workshop here in Ireland back in '86. And that opened up, and Ntombi was talking about creativity there. It opened up a whole side of me that I didn't know was there. And that was actually crystallized in, I began to draw on that workshop. I had failed art in school. I didn't know I could draw. And I just started making sketches of people in the group. It was a kind of a 2-week summer workshop we used to do in those days, residential, and we became very close. And then I began making sketches on some of the themes that were being talked about in the workshop and so on. And I've been drawing ever since. I draw more than I use words a lot of the times in my group work. So it unleashed that creativity in me. And it also, my wife actually, Jackie Gage, she did the workshop a few years afterwards, and she said, she put the words on it that I couldn't put on it. She said it was, I came home. So the values and the beliefs and all of that, the view of the way things can be done, were already in me, but they were buried under a whole lot of other stuff. And they came to the surface, as they did for many other people who've been through that and other processes. But one of the standout moments was that simulation that we did, Star Power, and then which kind of gives an experience of being unjustly treated in the room, and simulates that in real life in some way. And then the follow-up presentation on the dynamic model that was created by Philippe Franchet, I think, which illustrated and lays out in visual how the system works and doesn't work and how it can be changed, and the effect of taking back or taking some sort of powerful position by people who are disenfranchised. And a key bit in that was the linking of an alliance being built between those people and people who I suppose we could traditionally call middle class. So building alliances across different groups, but the central power being given to the people who experience the inequality. And years later, I worked a lot with Partners Training for Transformation here in Ireland. And years later, I moved from that organization. Well, I was still involved with it, but for a living, I moved into a community development work. So I suppose Partners had an emphasis more on community education, built around community development, and the other organization that I moved into, Community Action Network, was really a community activism organization with a strong part of that being community education. So it was kind of almost a reverse. So I found myself in housing estates around, especially in the inner city in Dublin, flats complexes and so on. And under the guise of some government programs and that, I found I was able to spend time in those communities. I was able to just hang around, really. And I did a lot of hanging around. I just spent a day talking to people in various different places and listening. And Ntombi underlined this. I found that to be true too, that when I listened, what was revealed to me wasn't what I always expected would be. So one of the things, for example, that people talked about an awful lot, but with a particular kind of energy, was the conditions within the homes, with a lot of dampness and mold growing on walls, and a lot of ingress of sewage coming up through people's baths and washing machines and sinks and so on. And the children being sick, a lot of asthma, children on baby inhalers and all of that kind of stuff. And the sense of humiliation that people felt, because the message was always from the authorities, the dominant message was, this is your fault. You're drying your clothes on your radiators. If you stop doing that, the damp will go away. Even though there was no public or private outdoor space to dry clothes, and there was nowhere to have dryers in no room in the flats. You should be opening your windows, and so on and so on. And none of this was true. We discovered by seeking expert advice that it was all untrue. It was the buildings, and the age of the buildings was the problem. And as people discovered that, and we also linked that listening with human rights, and began to talk to people about human rights. We'd learned about this from another group who were doing similar work in Belfast, and that human rights are really accessible, that it's black and white on a page, that you living in these conditions is a violation of your human rights. And once people saw that, the whole dynamic changed. People their shoulders went up, and they thought, I'm not a poor unfortunate, I'm somebody who has rights, and I'm entitled to try and claim those rights. And also the kind of analysis. So we sat in circles and talked about the experience of this, and who has power in this situation, and actually began to map out who was powerful, who was not powerful, and so on. And what people realized was they've been campaigning on these issues for years and years and years, but their campaigns never went above the local authority, the local, the council official. Whereas actually the power to do anything about this was at the government level, but they never went there. We drew on a little black with a marker around who are the people who we've been trying to influence. And we call it the black box because we drew with a black marker. We're still in the black box. That's what we kept saying. We need to go higher. And through collaborating with the media, eventually there was a breakthrough, and there was a lot of change happened. So all of that stuff about really listening, about building the alliances between people who live with that stuff, but who really can do so much, but need alliances with people like engineered experts, with media people. They need to build these alliances to have this support. And also the whole thing about doing conscientization work and all of that, all very Freirean and all very ingrained in that work, which I've reflected on in preparing for the conference before I realized those connections were there. So that's enough for me, I think.
That's great, Peter. Thanks very much. We've had some very powerful stories there on how talking about change and the talking about context and of course really listening to people. It's as Paddy said, it's all about facilitating a process. I think Ntombi put it well there. It's not you doing as a development worker doing something. It's allowing the space for people to do it for themselves, or opening up a space for them, facilitating that. So over to you for the dialogue and exchange. And there's some great feedback and comments coming in the chat box, but maybe you have questions for each other or comments for each other.
Well, could I start the ball rolling? And this is just, maybe it's a rhetorical question in a way to Ntombi and Peter. But I've just asked it of myself, just to test it out to see would it work. and the answer is yes. So the answer is, do you ever find that you get very frustrated in trying to pursue this particular type of methodology? In other words, do you get discouraged? Are there times when you get discouraged and feel, is it worth it? Can I ask Ntombi first, and then Peter, if you want to reply?
Some of the times, yes, it can be frustrating because these methods are processes. You cannot make it a project. In 6 months, people will be conscious and they will do this. And with funding organizations, they want you to say, by the end of this, your money will have achieved that. And with conscientization processes, it cannot be measured like that. And sometimes when you don't have funding, you get so frustrated. Let me share with you an example that I had with the Lawyers for Human Rights, funded by Better Foundation. They wrote to me and said, we need you to engage in awareness raising with 12 lawyers from 25 young lawyers from 10 countries. And I said, that is fine. And the next thing, they say, what is your budget? The accountant does the budget. And then I decided, this is the process that we are going to use. They sat down, they designed their own program, told me what to do, how to do, and where to be in that whole week. And they sent it to me 2 days before the workshop was to start. When I looked at it, it had nothing to do with these methodologies. So I wrote back, I said, I do not think lawyers need training for transformation or Freirean. You seem to have your own framework. Why don't you continue without me? The director was mad with me. How can you do that? You will fit in. So when they ask you to fit in, it is frustrating. And they are holding so much money to give you, and you want the money to use it for the people who need the process. So in this situation, I said, no, you can go ahead. When you need TFT, we will have to design it together. With Better Foundation, the lawyers and TFT, it has to be a dialogue. That workshop started yesterday, and I just said no on Monday. It's difficult, buddy. And the team will think you have said no to money. Sometimes holding on to the value and to the hope is a greater compromise and a sacrifice for the good, but it can cause pain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, that's powerful, I think.
Yeah.
Peter, by the way, I meant to say, Peter, that if anyone wants to see an example of your artistry, the slides of your presentation that you made at the conference are available on our webpage. Copyright Peter Dorman, of course. Sorry, Peter, you can ask the question.
Forget about the copyright. Yeah, frustration all the time, as well as joy and all of that, and a lot of that too. But in terms of frustration, since you asked, Paddy, my experience has been that to make any kind of change in a system, even a small change, it's 10 or 15 years. So the frustration is that the support for that often isn't there, and that overlaps along the lines of what Ntombi was talking about there. That overlaps in Ireland anyway. I'm sure it's the same everywhere else, where the community development has been co-opted into the state system. So it's, you know, those initial projects that flourished in places which were locally controlled and owned and all of that became subsumed into the local authority now. And so the kind of work I was talking about there, a human rights-based campaign on housing conditions, couldn't be led by a local community development project, because the local community development project is part of the council against whom we were campaigning. So that's very frustrating, finding those spaces where people will recognize, you know, because the day is far away, maybe it will come when the state is mature enough to say we should fund and support people to agitate against us, because that makes us a mature democracy. So we have to look, can we find the supports we need in philanthropy and so on? That's very difficult to do. But that's frustrating too, yeah. But the worst thing, the most frustrating thing is how the issues that, whether it's housing conditions, whether it's community safety or low income and all of those things, just persist and persist and persist. And it is very powerful when people find their voice and small changes are made. But it is, you know, the slow pace of change is very difficult.
Yeah, thank you. I should have answered the question myself. The answer was yes. I do get discouraged. But that's in terms of trying to work in a Freirean way in higher education. And it's just to do with the physical space, the architecture of a classroom, the limitations on the 55 minutes to, you have time for one decent discussion, you know, and all of these things. The problem of trying to do it, measure it out in terms of credits, and that people have to talk about these issues. And students might think, is this going to be in the exam? Is this going to be on the essay title, you know, because you've got to make it meaningful in that way, you know. So sometimes we get a bit, certainly at undergrad level, when we get people, if we manage to capture people for our MA course, it's a difference. You know, we can work with them for a whole morning or a whole afternoon or a whole day and do a proper workshop. And it's more like what we're used to. But that's sometimes the issue with us, you know. So the compromise that we make, I think I'll speak for, I don't know if any other of my colleagues are here, they'll contradict me if they are. We try to make it, we compromise by making it as interactive as possible in terms of what we do in a classroom. But that always isn't quite the same thing as following the process that Ntombi and yourself are more used to, you know, really working through issues and really listening to people and taking the time. Time is the issue we don't have. So sorry, I've spoken enough now. Max, do you want to bring anyone else in? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, hopefully some people from the floor, please maybe wave your hand or raise your hand. We've had some lovely feedback comments about Niamh said engaging, insightful presentations, and loves that Peter expresses himself creatively. And Eilish was saying, love the focus on creativity and its role in giving voice and creating change, which Ntombi was speaking about. But Sunil has a question, has hand up. Welcome, Sunil.
Thank you so much. I'm Sunil. I'm based in India and also a part of development worker.
Sunil, I know you. What are you doing here? I don't know if you are the
It's a reunion.
Very happy to be in this space. I'm very proud alumni of TFT diploma course. from 2016. So brilliant place and people. I think I consider myself blessed to get the exposure, how the transformation process actually happens on ground. So thank you for also organizing this. Yeah, thank you about the comments. Thank you, Mr. Reilly, for bringing this. It is extremely frustrating at times because when we are convinced with one methodology of engaging with people, which we find is very meaningful, and then for doing that work, at every moment, I need to convince my people. For example, I work in an NGO setup where I use participatory methodologies for working with youth and adolescents. And because my conviction in Freirean methods, I have been convincing my leaders, my institution heads to understand this approach and mobilize funds, change the atmosphere, structure of a training hall, for example, create more time spaces. And it takes time to them to understand. And then also when I go and teach at colleges, it is very different. They do not understand why do you want all those things. Even when I asked about, okay, can you give me a open space where I can actually conduct activities? And this principal asked me, okay, why do you want to conduct activities? Can you not give us PPT and then we will run it for students? And so I see there is so much of energy and time is gone into convincing people, whether at your organization, whether at funding agency, whether at other stakeholders. So I feel we need to create more solidarity for the first place to engage with these leaders so that they invest more commitment to these methodologies. And that approach, I feel is more required, because someone like me who is so enthusiastic, have gone to Cape Town, learned this methodology, have been in touch with TFT and other people. But then when things doesn't move so fast at the ground level, it becomes little challenge. So sorry, yes. Thank you for taking extra time, but that's my reflection.
Yeah, thanks, Sunil. And I see John Harrison has his hand up also.
Thank you very much. It's been absolutely fascinating from all the speakers. It was my question really was about critical consciousness and the powerful. How can we encourage or engage the powerful to kind of develop that critical consciousness without posing a threat to them? Because obviously if they are more aware of their position within the system, then we can kind of start to cross some of those lines of difference. Obviously, a lot of what I understand about Freirean's work is working with the oppressed, but how does it relate to the oppressor, and how can the tools that you use actually change the way those who oppress actually engage with the oppressors, engage with the oppressed? Thank you.
Yeah, the two good questions there now about engaging with leaders and trying to work within existing structures, and how we engage with the oppressor as opposed to the oppressed. Yes. Cool.
Yeah. My thanks, John, for that comment, and it goes to the heart of a lot of the stuff that I've been involved in, because at the end of the day, and I think Freire, from what I know about him, did say this and talked about that the oppressor has to be part of the solution, and this is where the dialogue comes in, and where the dialogue is really, really tough. And I suppose I sort of react a little bit as well to the use of the term the oppressor, because it personalizes it to an individual rather than to structures. And often people who find themselves in jobs in a civil service or in a powerful position, I have found some of those people to be absolutely wonderful as collaborators, but they're working within a system. And over time, and when I talked about the 10 or 15 year process, a lot of that process is facilitating those people to come into a situation where they can actually be empowered themselves to engage in a dialogical and partnership way with the people who are suffering, whose rights are not being recognized. So the duty bearers, as they'd be called in human rights language, need to also be brought along that journey as well. And in many cases, not in all by any means, but even if it's only in a minority of cases, those people actually personally do want to do that, or at least to try to do it. But without dialogue being set up between them and other players in the system, including the people, the rights holders, if the change happens, it's probably not going to be effective.
Yeah, I would just add to that. It's a really good question, John. And in fact, I think it asked during the conference as well in one of the workshops, if memory serves me correctly. I can't remember, maybe it was even in yours, Peter, I don't know, or in the one that you did, Max. And it is a very pertinent one. And I suppose academically, I've come across some thoughts on that from people like Robert Chambers. He has quite a good paper on how it can be approached, and Sean Ruth who used the text on, does a whole lot of stuff on oppression and how oppressors may also change, notwithstanding the limitations of the word, Peter. And there's at least one or two others, but the names are escaping me at the moment, of sources that I've often worked with for students, But that is the challenge, because there's only so much can happen with solidarity from below. But unless you get the uppers, as Chambers talks about them, also on board and out of their kind of little speech bubble, you won't see systemic change happening.
Yes, I do agree with both Paddy and Peter. I want to start off by saying some questions do not have straight answers. You experience the answers in the practice, discovering it. This is where curiosity comes in. How do we work with leaders who do not support? I was orientating the lecturers at Arupe because they adopted the TFT diploma into a degree, and we shaped it together. So I was asking my learned friends how they were practicing education. Then one professor said, I just come and tell them what to do, and if they don't do it, I grade them down, and that's it. I have all this power with me, and they are powerless. For me, that was it was a shock to hear somebody talk like that. But what led to him to talk like that was through a process of social and structural analysis. And sometimes, because it takes time, people don't want to engage with that. And yes, conscientization is risky. It is dangerous. Ask the young people from Sudan, Sunil, if you are still around, who were responsible for facilitating the youth to demonstrate against the government. They have witnessed the people dying amongst them. So we don't want to fantasize that conscientization can be done without making that decision. I think it was the Papuans who said to me, we have found a reason to die for. And at some point when you deal with conscientization, you ask yourself, whose side are you on? Are you with the oppressor or are you with the oppressed? Because your silence will not work. Conscientization says no to silence, questions inequality, but it is not a walk in the park.
Mm. Do you mind if I just, I'm conscious of limited time, Max. Do you mind if I just return to that original question that I was asking about, can we be without Freire in the next, let's say tomorrow? for a day. No, can we be without Freirean in the near future? Are there people now? Does it matter if Freirean is never mentioned again? Like in Ntombi, you said that you weren't aware that when you were starting on the some of the Freirean philosophy when you first did the training for transformation. Peter, you said something similar, that you struggled with the writings of Freirean, but you got something out of the program when you started doing the practical stuff. And I think a lot of people would resonate with that. Yeah.
Can I respond very shortly?
Please do.
We may not be without Freirean physically, yeah? But the ideas that he brought into this world will continue to influence the way people work in development or in education or with issues. I will take an example of feelings or emotions. When we feel, we become emotional and we act. But the question we need to ask is, what are the results of the action? Do we increase the problem or do we solve the problem? When you take it in that way, how will people's emotions ever be replaced by anything? Or maybe when we clone human beings, we take out emotions. Then they don't fight, then they don't laugh. We tell them how to see, how to be, and how to do. That's just an example of how we will, generations beyond us, might name these ideals, rename them, give them new names, but the practice remains the same.
Mm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Peter, any thoughts on it? Can we relabel Freirean? Does it need to be on the side of the tin?
Well, I suppose it is useful to have an individual who encapsulates a lot of a particular kind of thinking, and a framework for understanding the things we're trying to do, so that, one of the things that's been the enemy of the Freirean approach, I suppose, has been programmatizing everything. Everything has to be short term with KPIs and, all that stuff. If you have a counter reference to say that isn't Freirean, that would count for something, that could be useful. But it really is, as I think I hear Ntombi saying, it's the essence of the ideas and so on, and they're not located, and I'm sure the man wouldn't want them to be either, completely with him. They're in so many other people, including a lot of the people on this meeting, and that's what's really important, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I'm glad we agreed then. We found some point of agreement, because that's exactly what I was thinking. We can be without Freirean in terms of, actually, I was struck by what David Gwallam had said, your contact in Ntombi for us. Thank you for putting us in touch with David for the conference. That point that people were doing the training, but without necessarily knowing some of the philosophical academic stuff behind it, And it struck me that, people like bell hooks has often taken inspiration from people like Thich Nhat Hanh and engaged Buddhism. And I thought of, I often read some of the stuff from a guy called Eckhart Tolle. Some of you might know. He's kind of a new agey philosophy. It's not on my reading list, but it's for my leisure. And pure Buddhism is what it is, but Buddhism is never mentioned in any of his writings. And yet that's the essence of what he's talking about. And I thought maybe it doesn't really matter. It matters in some contexts, in academia, where you have to have theoretical foundations and critiques and all of those kind of things. And maybe that's where it'll be kept alive, at least at a theoretical level. But I think it must be more important to be kept alive in a practical level. The reflection and action are both needed.
Yeah.
So whether or not it's Freirean being forever remembered, or these particular ideas are somehow cherished because they work. if given time and adequate resources, as I think we've thrashed out today.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I can I realize a couple of people have had to go at 3 o'clock, but we are due to run on till past. So can I ask a question?
Are we? I didn't realize that. Okay.
Oh, okay.
I thought it was just the hour.
If you prefer to, I was just going to ask a question, but if
no, I think we can add another question. But I think we are due to finish around 3.
Yeah, because something that Peter was saying there about when you're faced with a situation and you say, well, that's not very Freirean. Who as a theorist could you call upon that's around today, currently, to exemplify a different, a more participatory way of working? Because we've talked about Paulo Freire, which we've mentioned Robert Chambers as well, and we've mentioned bell hooks, but are there other theorists, writers, are there other kind of programs or practices today that embody these kind of participatory, working together, listening, true, authentic engagement, and facilitating the space?
Well, I wouldn't know much about academic works really or anything like that, but I know that there is, and I've been part of it as well, the ULab stuff. If you're familiar with that, that seems to be David Cantor in that. It's this collaborative sensing of what's going on in the world, connected with injustice and environmental degradation and all of that, and trying to go on a particular form of a journey, which is at its heart is dialogical. So that's something that's going on that I've been found very nourishing for myself.
Yeah, and I'm conscious too of. Sorry, Ntombi. Sorry. Yeah, Ntombi. Sorry.
I was just going to say there are far too many that are trying to adapt and embody Freire in their practices. We have mentioned training for transformation, Sally Timmel and Anne Hope. But I've also learned about this guy, Peter Block. He's really good. He kind of embodies Freire in his way of writing. There's this book which he calls Community, the Structure of Belonging. And he focuses on how to create safe spaces for community dialogue, to explore, kind of listen, read their reality, redesign it and implement it. And yeah, there are just far too many to mention, but it stands out for me.
Thanks, Ntombi. And Paddy?
Yeah, no, I was going to say something similar, that they may not be directly in the same area, but I suppose, and they're all of a certain age, and some of them are dead, like Freire, you know. I suppose people like Jack Mesereau, who the transformative learning, perspective transformation guy, Stephen Brookfield, who must be retired now, the whole thing in critical thinking, Jane Thompson, she's probably a professor emeritus somewhere now, her emancipatory learning stuff, the late departed Bell Hooks, who we're dedicating the collected conference papers to. But I'm thinking also the cross-generated people like Daniel Goleman in emotional intelligence, the stuff that, you know, that touches a chord with me. I think that's Freirean, you know, some of the stuff that they talk about in emotional intelligence. And Roger Schwartz, who coming from the world of business and corporations, really, but talks about facilitation skills using the mutual learning model. And when you look at the mutual learning model, which talks about examining assumptions we have about our own values and other people's values, I say to myself, that's Freirean. Because it's about, you know, questioning those assumptions that we hear. So I suppose in international development anyway, we tend to try and make connections with all of those different fields of endeavor, you know, even from psychology, business studies, social studies, spirituality, you name it. But there's a lot of points of connection and overlap, I think. Okay. And many more to find out.
Okay, and Peter's shared a link there for the Presencing Institute, yeah.
Oh yeah, Otto Sharma, yeah. Another one, yeah.
Yeah.
And William Isaacs, people, yeah.
Any other questions or comments from the floor, or anyone want to? Any final words from any of our speakers then?
Well, just to thank everyone for your attentiveness and your insightful comments and questions. And I think there is obviously an interest in Freirean. It's confirmed that for me, and that's encouraging me when, as I say, I do get a bit discouraged at times that we're fighting a lonely battle. There are a lot of people that this kind of thinking and approaches has an appeal for.
We seem to have lost Ntombi, but we will. Yes, I just want to say thank you to Paddy Reilly, to Peter Dorman, and to Ntombi. We will pass on by email. We'll communicate with her. I think she also has her slides.
Oh, she's back.
Oh, great.
Sorry, yeah,
okay.
I think I was kicked out.
You were kicked out. Oh yeah.
You're welcome back.
We heard enough.
We're just wrapping up there now and saying thank yous to everyone. And if you would like to share your slides from today, we can do that. Ntombi, if you want to send them on to myself or Paddy. I see Eilish has her hand up. Yeah, Eilish has her hand up there. You're muted at the moment, Eilish, but if you want to.
Oh, Eilish is not driving at the moment.
I think she has. Yeah, she said something in the chat about having some difficulties. Okay, I just want to. I'll finish up then, and by saying thank you to all our speakers today for a very interesting conversation on the future of Freirean and how the many directions that his ideas have taken community development work and international development work. So so thank you to all. I'd just like to remind you that the research engagement and practice seminars continue. There's another one next week, is Wednesday, isn't it? On from result-based to adaptive approaches with Niamh Rooney. And there's another one then late at the end of April on climate change and the politics of economic transformations. So all details, of course, are on the Department of International Development website at Maynooth University. So thank you very much to all our speakers, and thank you very much to all our listeners for participating and taking the time out this afternoon.
Thanks, Max.
Thank you
very much, Paddy. Can I ask the other speakers just